do a little introduction. So welcome to today's Sovereignty. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Magnus, and today we are joined by Austin Hill and Eden Yago to discuss remaking a financial world with Bitcoin. So guys, don't forget that Twitter Spaces are interactive. We will take questions at the end. So just towards the end, don't forget to send a request to be a speaker, and I'll accept and we'll let you have a turn and ask the guys your questions as they come up. So just waiting for Austin to accept, if you can, the invitation to be a speaker. You do need to do it on the phone. It's an app, so I don't know if you're on the computer, but it's you'll want to use the Twitter app.
It looks like he's been added as a speaker.
Oh, okay, great.
There.
Okay, great.
Thank you, guys.
Cool. All right. So yeah, I'll just do a quick introduction for y'all. Austin Hill, you're the co-founder and former CEO of Blockstream. You're an angel investor and venture capitalist actively involved in blockchain technology. And Austin is well known within the Cypherpunk movement and founded Zero Knowledge Systems, a company that focused on protecting people's privacy online. Welcome, Austin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And also, we have Eden Yago, who's our in-house guest. He's a bit of a Bitcoin OG and an early contributor to the Sovryn protocol. Yago has been in the space since 2011 and has founded multiple Bitcoin-focused companies, Epiphyte and Cement DAO. And he believes that Sovryn plays a crucial part in creating a world built on Bitcoin. Welcome, Mr. Eden Yago.
Hello.
All right. So I guess to just kick this off, we'll start off with some questions that we at Sovryn were curious about for you, Austin. Austin, you were often described as a cypherpunk. Could you describe, just for all of our listeners here, what a cypherpunk is and why you might identify as such?
Sure. I kind of came up in the era when the cypherpunk movement was just being born. So this was following on the battle around encryption rights that was ongoing. So Phil Zimmermann had released, this is circa 1993, 1994. PGP had been released. There was a battle going on in the U.S. court systems over Daniel Bernstein, famous cryptographer, incredible DJB, as he's known in the crypto world, who has taught and trained a generation of cryptographers, was fighting the U.S. government based off the idea that he could export algorithms written in print, based off the idea that cryptography and source code were free speech items, and he was being prosecuted for exporting munitions. And cryptography as an art was very much treated as a weapon under the Wassenaar Agreement by the U.S. government. And so there was a lot of questions at the early days of the internet where a group, the cypherpunks, emerged to say that protection of our sovereign rights, protection of our property rights, protection of our ability to maintain digital anonymity, pseudonymity, privacy, are based off cryptography. And there is an opportunity to build a world where, in the grand scheme of things, that sway between collectivism and, centralized organizational power and decentralized individual power and individualism, we may be able to sway the pendulum back to the individual, where the individual actually has more rights and is able to protect those rights based off math and cryptography in this new internet world we're building. And that movement and that idea coalesced in the form of the cypherpunks, the mailing list, the writings of Tim May, John Gilmore, Eric Hughes. And I was there at the beginning when some of these conversations were started. And I, coming from a background, I was an ex-hacker who had built a security consulting company. I had seen friends of mine arrested by the FBI and treated as terrorists simply because they were good on keyboards. Where the overreaction to their capabilities of being able to, poke and prod and find security vulnerabilities far outweighed the actual danger that any of them posed. These were 15-year-old kids who were getting arrested with SWAT machine guns and SWAT response and having their civil liberties trampled because the police didn't understand computers and there were no rules for cyberspace. So at the dawn of this time, I got really involved in the idea that we need to protect our rights and our freedoms with cryptography and math, and we can't rely on trusting the governments of yesterday to define the rules for tomorrow. And that was, I guess, the common theme that kind of pervaded the cypherpunk movement. And being an entrepreneur, I decided to express my motivations and my beliefs in trying to create products and services for the internet age. And that was the impetus for creating zero knowledge systems, which we did a lot of work on early Tor, privacy and anonymity systems, and tried to build eCash, it turns out, badly, but we did try to build an electronic cash so that you could have a bearer certificate instrument to pay for things on the internet without revealing your identity.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and I guess it begs the question to our other guests. Yago, do you also view yourself as a cypherpunk? Do you think that ethos is prevalent within Sovryn and the community?
Well, I think the cypherpunk ethos is definitely prevalent within Sovryn and its community. As for whether or not I consider myself a cypherpunk, I certainly identify with cypherpunk ethos and goals. I don't necessarily think I am particularly cypherpunk. I'm too doxed for that. But I think what one of the key tenets that I really like in Sovereign is the idea that you shouldn't have to be technical in order to be free. And but so I think there's like an aspect where what I would like is for people to have access to privacy by default, even if they are not cypherpunks themselves. But if you look at sort of like the very first manifesto that Aurora wrote, which was the first sort of piece of literature written about Sovereign, it's full of references to cypherpunk articles, and I think that the cypherpunk ethos is very much sort of like the early internet ethos of the internet being a tool for empowerment of the individual, and Sovereign is all about trying to build tools that empower self-sovereign individuals. And so what I'm hoping is that what we can build around Bitcoin is a world which is more similar to Bitcoin, right? A world which empowers the individual, which is based on cryptographic assurances, and which places the individual in the driver's seat.
So it's funny Yago mentions this idea of whether or not you're technical enough or you shouldn't have to write technical. This was kind of an early discussion in the cypherpunk movement on the mailing list, so much so that at one point there was an offshoot of the cypherpunk list called coderpunks, because there were a whole bunch of people who got involved in the cypherpunk movement who weren't programmers, and there was this ethos that cypherpunks write code, and that's a great meme. And there were certainly some incredible members of the community who actually got out there and wrote things. We had Len Sassman, who wrote Mixmaster. We had Adam Back, who wrote a Hashcash. We had Remailer software. We had experimentation and code being written that got out there, and that was kind of like, hey, this is our weapon, or this is our tool of choice to enact the world we want, is code. But there was a much larger community. I mean, I haven't programmed since I was 15 years old, writing really bad Turbo Pascal programs on the Macintosh. My coding capabilities died a long time ago, where I invested in working with engineers and doing architecture and doing systems design and threat and security profiling to be able to build businesses that enabled the ethos. So, and a large part of it was what Yago said, which was this idea of privacy by design. For this world to exist for everyone, they shouldn't need to be technical. They should be able to elect to be private, be self-sovereign without needing to be a technical cryptographer.
Excuse me, Mike. Sometimes it's just hard to get that button. So, Austin, you seeing as the title of this is "Remaking a Financial World with Bitcoin," we understand that you sought to achieve this with Blockstream. Can you elaborate on your story there, like when you started it and what was the vision behind it?
Sure. So I was kind of in a career transition. I had, frankly, after 20 years of doing startups in the kind of .com space and zero knowledge and various other projects, I took some time off and I was burnt out, and I was playing poker and kind of recreationally, and I was I would have side bets with myself on how long I could go without looking at my inbox because I was just so turned off at that point. And unfortunately, that was the early days of Bitcoin. That was 2010, 11 when Bitcoin was emerging. And I would get emails the few times I would look at my inbox from ex-employees saying, you got to pay attention to this Bitcoin thing. And I was just like, I'm glad someone figured it out, but I just spent $10 million trying to build eCash. I went on a very painful 12-year journey of a startup, up, down, and I'm just, my head's not in the game. And it was finally in 2013 Bitcoin was still at a couple $100. It was still early. I think it was right after the Bitcoin Vegas conference that had happened that Adam reached out to me, and he was just leaving a startup that he was involved in. He was kind of at as a very last phase of vesting. He had sold a startup that he had created with a bunch of ex-Zero Knowledge employees, and he really kind of said, Austin, I need to sit down with you. There's so many analogies to the early days of the internet. We've got these open protocols. There's work that needs to be invested in core infrastructure that is technical, that's hard, that I don't see anyone investing in terms of application plays, because at the time we were seeing a lot of exchanges start up and, some cool application layer like Satoshi Dice and gambling and, that emerges early on in any ecosystem. You see certain industries, adult gambling, exchange, trading emerge, marketplaces. But Adam was like, I really think we can do some work on the core infrastructure. Can you help me think about how we fund this and how we create a company and how we bring something together? And I finally, in the last half of 2013, went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, really got up to speed, I think quite quickly, just because I had a history and I had studied cryptography and I knew, all the writings of Nick Szabo, and I had studied and worked on this stuff and tried to build it for a long time. So I really saw quite quickly what was unique about Bitcoin. The fact that they had figured out how to do decentralization, the fact that they had figured out the minting process along with inflation-controlled difficulty adjustment for Hashcash. Like, those things in combination and the incentives, I was like, I can't believe we missed this, but thank God someone found it. And I was all in. I called Adam. I'm like, what can we do? And so we spent a couple months sitting together in boardrooms in Malta where he lived, talking to some of the core developers, talking about what does the Bitcoin ecosystem need if this is going to be the base layer of money, if this is what we think it is. And I've used this analogy before as kind of the Manhattan Project of money. And I view that Bitcoin was that. There was this kind of like once in a lifetime one-off event where the creation of the right incentives, the solving of Byzantine's generals problem all came together in kind of a perfect genesis moment where, it wasn't plagued by some of the issues of like coin distribution and misaligned incentives and tokenomics and bad funding models. It just came into existence as, if you believe in open source software, contribute, get involved. And over time, as that grew and it proved its resiliency and it faced various attacks and challenges, it just added to the momentum and the belief that this could actually form a new base layer, a new reserve currency, and it can solve the one unique problem that no one else could solve, which is how do you create a non-sovereign digital asset that isn't controlled by a single entity, that is censorship proof, that is distributed. And if you solve for that, then anything else can be solved for at the higher levels. And it's kind of like TCP/IP when it developed the OSI data model. For those technical on the call, the OSI data model and TCP/IP allowed a lot of innovations to occur at the higher level. We had Gopher, we had FTP, then we had HTTP. And that innovation can happen, and people are encouraged to build on those higher layers, and that attracts capital and investment because there's longevity and de-risking, because you don't need to go back and rewrite the protocol. If I was building an internet company like Facebook, and I was dependent on whether or not the IETF was going to adopt my rule at the base layer, for my, my video conferencing or my social networking company to succeed, I wouldn't be able to raise capital. I wouldn't even want to build that business because I wouldn't want a standards body to be able to change the base layer protocol and wipe out everything I was building on my layer. So similarly, once we had a separation of layers, and I think that really did come when when Lightning and sidechains and a real formal model for second layer innovation, which Sovryn is taking advantage of with RSK, and there's a lot more innovation to come in that model. It really became an exciting platform that we could see this as the internet of money. And I raised the capital, helped Blockstream get started, brought together the engineers, and it was kind of off to the races, as they say.
Austin, this is really cool archaeology. I remember when Blockstream was getting started. It seemed very, very, very cool, but I couldn't figure out what the business model was.
By the way, nor did we. I literally walked in. I walked into our investors. I had this really, really funny bit. This is known internally, but I don't think I'm breaking any NDAs by talking about this. But so I had been a venture capitalist, and I walked into one of our meetings, and I was kind of doing the presentation. I said, listen, I think Bitcoin's going to be the source of an entire new ecosystem of financial innovation. I said, I don't know how big it is. I don't know what's going to emerge. I just know that if you gather the smartest people in the industry, something good will come of it. Because what's scarce right now is incredible engineers that you put together in a room and allow them to focus on what needs to get fixed. I said, that has not happened. They're distributed. One's working from Mozilla during the day. One's working over here in Europe, supporting Bitcoin weekends and nights. There's no formalized support for these guys, yet they're holding the entire ecosystem together. And I'm like, we need our Red Hat moment. We need our internet moment where these guys are given the freedom to come together and innovate. And then I switched to a slide and I said, whenever an entrepreneur tells you the size of their market, assume they're lying, because entrepreneurs lie about market size. They're like, if I can grab 2% of the Chinese market, that's, so many billion people. And they do all these weird calculations to, overinflate how big the market is, when, frankly, a lot of entrepreneurs just don't know. They have guesstimates. And I said, so I'm not going to come in here and tell you some big number for market size for Bitcoin and the blockchain technology. I said, because I really don't know. I said, that being said, here's my best guess. And I moved to the next slide and I put $15 quadrillion. And it was kind of like, it was a tongue-in-cheek joke. And everyone in the room starts laughing, saying, okay, you told us not to believe you, but then you go put the largest market size number. And I said, I don't know if this is the game we're playing, but we're certainly in the league of playing the game for all the world's money. And what is the value of the total assets under management for all the world's money? Just the derivatives market on the Chicago Board of Exchange is X quadrillion dollars. Just the total value of this. I said, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I have no idea what exists from here to there. I just know that if you put the smartest people in a room together and you focus around a core ethos of open source innovation, open source development, and focus on the protocol, something good will come of it. And I need to raise enough money to give them time to figure it out. And thankfully, I had investors who believed in that vision and gave us the room to grow.
Remind us, how much was that Blockstream raised at the time?
Yeah, so we raised $21 million for our seed round.
That's right, yeah. And that was it was an eye-popping amount at the time, because today any sort of project is supposed to raise $21 million or whatever, but at the time that was remarkable.
It certainly set the bar high, and there are, by the way, there are good things and bad things about that. I don't regret it at all, because we did create the team we promised, and great things have come out of it. But sometimes too much money too early, and I've seen this with ICOs and some of the tokenomics, give projects way too much room to nurture bad behaviors outside of the consequences of bad decisions. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
when you have so much money that you can dump into marketing, that you can dump into trying 8 things, you never know why something failed. Was it because of lack of attention? Was it because we spread our bets too wide and far, and we didn't focus on doing one thing and one thing well? And you never get a chance to learn that when you have outsized resources for the maturity and the learning of your team.
Yeah. So, it's curious. I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your thoughts about sort of how things continued then in Blockstream. I remember in 2014, soon after, wasn't that soon, but some months after the Blockstream announcement, you guys released the paper on sidechains, and then the beautiful graphics of all of these sort of wheels of chains connecting with each other, and I think the entire Bitcoin world was really really taken with the idea of sidechains at the time, and there was a very strong sense that this was the future of Bitcoin, and that also this meant that anything that would potentially be useful to Bitcoin could be built for Bitcoin without having to change main chain. And here we are, 7 years, I think, at this point. No, more. About 7 years later, and a lot of things have happened, but among other things, Blockstream have released Liquid, and now they're doing the first of probably several billion-dollar raises for a nation state. So very exciting things happening, but that vision hasn't quite played itself out. So I'm curious what you think about that vision then and now, and how things kind of worked, and maybe then we can talk a little bit about your vision and sidechains today.
Sure, happy to. So the actual sequence of events was, so we wanted to release the Bitcoin sidechains white paper when we announced the funding. So it was kind of end of 2014. I think it was October that we announced that we had raised the 21 million. We created the company, and we published the Bitcoin sidechains white paper at the same day. And then we kind of went dark and quiet for a while, where we focused on just, we had some logistical issues. We had assembled 11 core developers, and not all core developers, but contributors in the Bitcoin ecosystem from around the world. We had different geographies. We were trying to set up the company, and we were trying to, encourage them to continue to work on the open source projects that they were working on, but also coalesced around some common product strategy to say, okay, what are the products that we want to release? And so that emerged in the form of elements. We said, let's just focus on releasing an open source toolkit that had the base implementations of some of the enhancements we would like to see on sidechains. And so that had SegWit, that had confidential transactions. It had a bunch of elements to say, if we were to build a sidechain, here are some of the base improvements that we think are building blocks to build better sidechains that couldn't be rolled out in the main chain right now, but at least can be experimented with as an upgrade path to Bitcoin on a sidechain or as an alternate parallel. So that was the first formalized product release, was the Elements open source toolkit, which is still out there and being maintained, and anyone can download and use. And we've seen some of those technologies like confidential transactions show up in other alt chains, and it's used in Liquid. From there, the work that was required to actually build kind of the full sidechain ecosystem as we envisioned required other people like RSK, like yourself, Sovryn, to get involved. And it required some changes in the mining ecosystem in terms of being able to either merge mine or do federated pegs, or, we had to have some way to be able to manage the peg in and the peg out to the sidechain. And Drive Chain and some of the work Paul Storks was still at its infancy at this time, but he's obviously pushed that idea of how do you do merge mining. But there were a lot of different moving parts, and there were a lot of community dynamics where we did not feel we could come in and just tell people this is how the industry needs to emerge, because Bitcoin doesn't work that way. There is no leader of Bitcoin. You have to build consensus. And so we felt that the industry would be best served by us launching a sidechain, even if it was on a different trust model, like a federated peg, and just show people it working in existence. Because the best proof is actually something running. And it turns out that that took a lot more time and was harder than we thought, which was getting all the exchanges to launch Liquid. Because when you're trying to launch an alt network where the incentives aren't get rich off the token, if we went to everyone and said, we're launching a brand new coin and we'll give you X amount of tokens that you can sell in a year, it's very easy for people to say I'm in or I'm not, because their motivation is very clear. It's a monetary get-rich-quick motivation. But when there is nothing like that, and you're trying to get exchanges who are very, very busy launching new coins because their customers demand them to have trading pairs with coins, and we tell them, okay, we want you to launch an alt chain that has no tokenomics, that has no commissions. The long-term benefit will be that your traders and your market makers can move coins faster, and they can protect themselves against front running using confidential transactions so that people can't, survey their money movement. And it can deal with some overflow capacity and alleviate some pressure on the main chain. Do you want to do this? It turns out that the sequence of events to get a critical mass of them to do it, to adopt it, and to start to see value took a lot longer than we thought. And so that was the path that Blockstream did with Liquid. And I'm very happy to see that it's now being used. Like you pointed out, we're now issuing assets like the Volcano bond for El Salvador. I loved to see that the RSK team also took up the tool set and took up the federated peg to say we're going to bring smart contract programming language. But the reality is, with Ethereum and the get-rich-quick money that came from the ICO phase, a lot of talent and a lot of innovation was diverted and rewarded, unfortunately, for doing things that were not necessarily our vision of the future. And it's a free world. People are allowed to do that. I would argue that it was bad. It was a bad investment. It was a bad distraction of talent. But going off and doing a token on the Ethereum network, doing an ERC20 token, was cheaper, faster, less governance, and it allowed you to do whatever you want, and oftentimes get very rich with delivering no value. Other times it allowed you to attract and incentivize people with lots of money and lots of tokens. So it was kind of the tortoise and the hare approach. The people who were moving fast, they may not have the staying power to be around today. A lot of those projects died. But at the time, it distracted a huge amount of talent and resources. And the fact that it occurred at the same time we were dealing with an internal civil war around the block size debate and a lot of the attacks around, did we have too much influence as a company? Did Blockstream, take over the industry? Should we increase the block size? Should we not? That was also occurring all at the same time. So to a large degree, I think it forced us to say our community, being the Bitcoin community, needed to get its own house in order to make hard decisions about what we viewed the upgrade path for Bitcoin being, what is the right layering approach. And Lightning really, really did save the day there. And I'm really proud that we had invested in that in parallel to sidechains, because, the discussion we had internally was we're not sure that sidechains is going to be the answer to everything, nor should it be, because, a good protocol has multiple ways to scale on multiple layers, and Lightning solves a problem that sidechains don't. And so we made the decision early on to use some of our venture capital to fund Rusty and fund the work he was doing on the open source with no expectation of return. We just thought it was good for Bitcoin. And I'm really, really happy to see all the innovation that's happening on Lightning with RGB, with all of the great companies that are now starting to build Lightning as second layer protocols. And so when I look at the overall ecosystem, while it wasn't exactly what we imagined, a world of like 50 different sidechains and it leading to everything moving to Bitcoin and all these altcoins dying, I am very pleased to see that the good engineering decisions and some of the I think the engineering ethos of security over speed ended up giving us a framework that is allowing for multiple innovations in multiple ways, like sidechains, like Sovryn, like RSK, and in parallel, all the innovations on Lightning that I think are technically the better choice for the long run and give us a better Bitcoin ecosystem and a better monetary base layer for the world.
So there's a lot of questions that raises for me, as well as some comments like, one of the things that we decided to do with Sovereign is to have a token in part because we recognize the value in that can have in driving development and a community. Another question, and so maybe that's something we can discuss. Another thing which, that made me think about is how you think about Lightning Network versus sidechains, and sort of where do you see sidechains going today, and in particular, how you think about building more trustless pegs. And then maybe a third thing to discuss is sort of the competition between Bitcoin and every other crypto system in terms of mind share and monetary value. But maybe let's start with the more technical side there, right? Which is, given what you've seen over the last few years with Lightning, with sidechains, what's your sense today of the importance of sidechains going forward and the critical path or the development path we can take to get there?
So, I think overall, I think there will be some very important innovations on sidechains, but I think the effort that it takes to organize the pegs to deploy the value creation around it does not lead itself naturally to the type of innovations that the open, decentralized platform that Lightning provides does, but for different reasons and different use cases. So I view the opportunities for sidechains, at least in the federated peg trust model, are narrow but very deep, right? Like there's not going to be 500 of them. There may be 10. There may be 15. But it's going to force those 10 or 15 to really define their value proposition deeply and to really nail it. And those will have, I think, a lot more longevity than some of the projects that might emerge as layer 2, layer 3 projects on Lightning. Because, and that's just natural, because the effort and the time it takes to put up the peg, the investment with partners that you need, the validating of the unique value proposition. In Liquid's case, that's some of the advanced trading networks, that's the asset issuance, that's the confidentiality. In Risk and RSK, that's some of the programmability and the smart contract. For Sovryn and what it's trying to do, it's the DeFi functionality and the lending. Bringing that and building an ecosystem around that takes time. It takes multiple market participants. But once you get it right, it actually has a lot more longevity than some things that might be built on Lightning, which might just be cool. Like, we may just see a really, really cool pay for content or reward for content or a replacement for a like button where you can send a Satoshi to actually show someone that you prefer this over that. But we'll see thousands of experimentations on the Lightning side. And those experiments will look a lot more like the .com and the internet and the Web 2.0 companies, where there'll be 50 of an idea and one or two will emerge as a great one, because the cost of launching them and the freedom is a lot lower. The bar to entry is so much lower because it is a totally open source stack and it's totally distributed. But it's not going to solve the same problems that sidechains will solve. And the fact that both of these can exist in parallel shows the strength of the network and shows the richness of the ecosystem. So I don't think it needs to be one or over another. I would certainly love to see some more investment and some progress made on merge mining and trustless pegs that don't rely on federation, that move sidechain innovations much more to the type of innovations we're seeing in the Lightning Network that don't require any permission, any federation to be mounted. But there are some hard problems in getting that working, as Paul Stork and Truthcoin and the Drive Chain initiatives have seen. But I'm still hopeful that hopeful, and I believe that deserves investment and that deserves attention that we shouldn't ignore, because having multiple upgrade paths and multiple layering options for innovation and doing that in a very secure and trustless way that always moves towards less centralization, less trust minimization, and more open source principles, I think is a goodness to focus on. And that can exist in parallel to what Blockstream is doing. Like I'm a shareholder in Blockstream. I'm not trying to be there. I no longer speak for the company officially, but I'm a big fan of what they do and what they've built. But if 50 other people build something that competes with them, I'm still very happy over what we've done, because that's a rich open source ecosystem. I don't think the ecosystem's not healthy if only Blockstream wins and only Blockstream has a successful sidechain. I think that would be a failure for us and the ecosystem.
So I have a slightly different view, and I'd like you to challenge it, or maybe I'll challenge you. So what I think about sidechains is they can potentially facilitate even more permissionless, even easier development in Lightning Network for two reasons. One, I think working with Lightning Network is quite hard. Because you're not just programming, you also really need to think about the topography of the network while you're developing. Whereas writing smart contracts, we've seen, has attracted a huge number of developers to the smart contract space because it's been much easier to pick up. And the other thing about it is state channels, by their very nature, and sort of like the linear nature of transactions that occur in them, and the fact that they need to be pre-funded, are more limited in many ways in terms of what it is they can do. And I think that also lends itself to making it easier for a larger number of developers to pull around it. And that's before you sort of start adding in maybe additional token incentives. So I think if we can get good sidechains, and I think that's one of the cool things that Rootstock provides, if you can provide a sidechain which allows for open-ended development, then I think you can see a flourishing of development very, very quickly. And so for me, it's less about how many sidechains we have, because I suspect we will have several sort of standardized technologies around sidechains. Sort of like the elements standard, let's call it, which is liquid, and there's the EVM standard, which is rootstock, and then there might be a few others, but they may have multiple instances. But a lot of the activity, I think, the majority of the activity will not be in creating sidechains, but in building on and around sidechains. And I think that I think that there is no real competition between the different types of Bitcoin Layer 2 systems. So I think Lightning Network can really be enhanced by smart contract systems and by sidechains and vice versa. And sort of the challenge that we have for all of these things is building a more trustless peg. I think that's probably the biggest barrier that we have right now. Merge mining in its current, even as it currently exists, I think works quite well. It can be improved further, but it works. The federated peg, however, I think has turned a lot of people off, and I think we can do much better. You mentioned Paul Stork and the work that he's doing, and I think that's one direction. But also very interesting to me is you were very involved before it was cool. You were like a zero knowledge hipster right? In zero knowledge systems. And one of the things that we're starting to see now is the development of the potential to create trustless pegs, which have cryptographic proofs. In other words, that utilize zero knowledge systems in order to provide for the peg. And so I'm interested in, and so my view is, and I suspect this is your view as well, that the way we get there, the way we get either drive chains or zero knowledge pegs integrated into Bitcoin main chain, maybe as the last change that we need to ever introduce into main chain, is by proving to the community how useful it is by building out the really, really useful tools now, like you know, the volcano bonds and the Bitcoin-backed lending and decentralized futures, right, that exist on Sovryn. You put all of these things together and they start to become more popular. And I think it becomes very, very clear to Bitcoiners why they would want those things to be more trustless. It becomes very clear to Bitcoin developers why it would be good to have those things more trustless. And then I think it becomes a natural priority for Bitcoin to prioritize the two-way peg.
Absolutely, and this is the chicken and the egg problem. We're going to need to show the value to get the resources and support for the adoption and the investment in whatever form that trustless peg comes. And I share your optimism that we might see it in cryptography and some of the zero-knowledge trustless peg systems. I do agree with a lot of what you said. I just, I look overall in the ecosystem and, yes, there are problems with the pre-funding of state channels and Lightning for certain use cases that make sidechains just a much more desirable platform for certain applications. But there are a whole bunch of stuff in its, in the instantaneous nature of Lightning that once that ecosystem builds and once I think we see a maturity of wallets that just kind of by default set up some small amount of pre-funding and set up kind of a multi-layer wallet, not multi-chain, but, having Lightning balances and your regular balances just kind of merged almost seamlessly. And once we figure out some of the UI issues, I think it leads to just an overall richer experience. But that wallet should also support assets and DeFi and multi-asset issuance and being able to see, I own so-and-so bonds, I own so-and-so tokenized assets, I own so-and-so contracts, smart contracts that are earning me annuity or yearn, and that should exist in parallel to being able to say, I threw a Satoshi to this guy to vote for his content on some content social experiment using Lightning. And, I think that the path to get there is going to involve a lot of different companies, a lot of different protocol attempts. But I do agree with you that we need to prove out some of those use cases to get attention from the core developers and to get the consensus built around the fact that trustless pegs should come into existence, and we need to have more proof points of how to do it well.
So what do you think about sort of the way the Bitcoin community has evolved? My sense, from where I sit is there is somewhat certainly less discussion of sidechains these days. It feels like, to a degree, as part of the conversation around technological advancement and thinking about how we can advance the open source technology around Bitcoin, part of that seems to have moved to other parts of crypto. And the rest seems to have been almost completely absorbed by Lightning Network. Do you feel the same way, or do you have a bit of a different sense of it?
To be honest, I don't track the day by day. I mean, I still track what happens on the Bitcoin dev mailing list. I still kind of keep my foot slightly in the water in terms of which BIPs are being debated and discussed. But given the fact that I'm a couple of years out from, being CEO of Blockstream, and I've kind of enjoyed some distance, I am not. I would say I'm not the best person to ask in terms of the day-to-day dynamics. I do have some overall opinions that anytime a community fights a civil war, there is a cost to that. And that cost comes in kind of burnout. It comes in wear and tear of some of your best minds. And it comes in the form of apathy, in the sense that people feel like, okay, either I fought my side of the war and I lost, or I fought my side of the war and won, but I just don't really feel like fighting for the next version of that war. Like, it's hard to come out of that. And I think coming out of the block size wars, there was just kind of a sense of, okay, I'm glad all these other communities forked off. And you know, the community did muster a lot of enthusiasm about getting Taproot adopted. But, you know, if you see some of the innovations being proposed, even by like Jeremy with some of his, proposals recently, there is a diverse opinion amongst developers on how fast do we want to introduce changes? How fast do we want to push for more, core innovation changes? And I think some of the discussion around sidechains, unfortunately, is a victim of that. They don't get the same amount of attention or debate necessarily that they deserve in terms of an upgrade path and an optionality for how we can add functionality, because I think a lot of people are like, okay, I'm just spent. I don't know how much I want to go fight these Reddit wars. But that's an assumption on my part. I'm not in there pushing those agendas. I've spoken to a few developers who have said, I'm just happy we got through the last one, and give me 6 months or give me a year to work on some fun innovations now that we got what we got adopted. I don't know that I want to go fight for the next thing yet.
I completely agree with you that a big part of it is hangover from the block size war still. And it also introduces a certain rigidity or, defensiveness into the culture, which I think is going to take time. I think the fact that we managed to introduce Taproot, which is like the first major change since, it was a bit of a cleansing experience. And we do that a couple more times, and I think the confidence and the sense of innovation, which to a degree was lost, is coming back. And you can already see this with sort of like the pushback against toxicity within the Bitcoin culture, which has been happening over the last 6 months. Basically it started when it became clear that Taproot was going to go through. Suddenly people started saying, all right, I think there was like a spiritual cleansing there.
Why don't we open it up for questions? Because I have some time that I can stick around past 1 o'clock, but not too much. And I'd love to hear if our audience has any questions.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was just going to suggest the same thing. So if anyone has questions, just raise your hand. And our sovereign host will invite you to speak.
Yep, just make a speaker request, guys. So if you want to shoot some questions, just put out a speaker request. Let's give them a moment. While we give them a moment, guys, I'll just ask a question that some of the sovereign people had. Given recent events in Canada with the government choosing to freeze financial accounts, how do you see Bitcoin playing a role in resisting financial censorship in the future?
Well, I'm very sad. I'm a Canadian. I'm a very proud Canadian. We started Zero Knowledge in Canada purposely because Canada had a different policy than the United States, and we could export cryptography. And we were kind of sitting on top of the United States geographically, kind of looking down and saying, ha, 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 we can export crypto. You can't. Really proud of ourselves. And it's a sad day to see that reverse itself to the point where we now have a government enacting policies that are targeting people's financial sovereignty using legislation because they have dissident or diverse opinions. Just because you don't agree with me, I'm going to target your bank account. And I think that's a horrendous move for freedom. And definitely, unfortunately, it's good for Bitcoin. And I hate these things where tyranny goes up, number goes up. Or I hate the fact that we have to have tyrannical and bad policy to emphasize, because there are actual victims. There are actual truckers. There's people who are the victims of these horrible policies. And I hate to see that, regardless of the fact that it's good for proving out the use case for something I love and I'm invested in. I would much rather take a low slung approach where people come to Bitcoin for its other values than being forced to Bitcoin because they are the victims of bad policy. But at the end of the day, it does really accentuate the positive aspects of Bitcoin when people take up the tyrannical flag.
Okay. Well, guys, don't forget to submit your request to speak. And we have our first question from Mr. David Soroy. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Hey guys, Austin, thanks for doing this. So earlier you spoke of this kind of chicken and egg problem, right? Of kind of, it's like, how do you get people incentivized who want to build some of these zero knowledge systems or trustless pegs? And if you don't have the trustless pegs, then how can you build like the kind of use cases? So I'm curious, in your opinion, like, are there any use cases that you see as particularly interesting that you think could drive some of that interest where people say, okay, like maybe we do need some of this stuff?
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. Yes. Well, I think the big ones, so certainly exchange functionality, market making, liquid and asset issuance, that was the one that Blockstream chose, and I think that was a fairly obvious one, but it takes a lot of time. And I think the smart contract EVM that Rich chose was a natural and a very good choice. And the DeFi choices. I mean, we see what happens when DeFi goes wrong with bad wrapping. We saw it recently with the Solana Ethereum wrapper breaking. There's not always going to be a jump capital who will bail out an entire ecosystem from collapsing. I think it's great that they did and that they, but it obviously shows that there's enough money in the ecosystem that they're willing to write off a $300 million mistake in their smart contracting language, but that should not be what we're building the financial future of DeFi on, is the blind leading the dumb and, building a house of cards on a bed of sand where the next wave that comes in just wipes out an entire part of the ecosystem because your wrapper technology wasn't secure. So I think we can do much better. And I think the work that Sovryn and the work that other people are doing on trustless pegs that bring some of the DeFi programmability back into the Bitcoin ecosystem, some of the work that Taproot enables with DLC contracts to enable like Oracle and programming of outside events into smart contract programming, I'm very excited about those areas. And I think that some of those can start really small. Like, can I build a Super Bowl betting application where I can bet on the Super Bowl peer-to-peer with my friend and solve it with a discrete log contract? I think that would be a great little side project to just show people it's possible, but then you enable sportsbook betting on Bitcoin.
Definitely. And so I do have one more follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm curious, what, if any, BIPs or soft forks are particularly intriguing to you? From my perspective, it's always kind of been Bitcoin's all about slow and steady and safety and security, right? But as I've dove in a little bit deeper, I'm far from kind of understanding the nuances of it. I've kind of heard from some core devs that like it just feels like they're not really super excited. There's no urgency to push anything through, and I'm particularly thinking of like Jeremy Rubin's like CTV and like 119. I think initially on the surface level, it sounds like it's very cool, but then some people are like, because it's not like, recursive covenants, like you really can't do that much. And so I'm wondering like how much of that kind of process are you thinking it's like, it truly is because we're going slow and steady, or it's just that there's really not a ton of proposals that somebody's like consensus, like we need this 100% type thing.
So I'm just getting up to speed on a lot of the discussion around Jeremy's proposal and recursive covenants because I had an ex-employee pitch me a project that was dependent on some of the changes. And so I would hesitate to have a strong opinion because I'm still at the learning mode. And I like the fact that we have a default immune system response towards safety and towards longevity in the Bitcoin ecosystem. I'm also very consciously aware, almost like in the social media side around Bitcoin maximalism, that our immune system response around Bitcoin amongst Bitcoin maxis can almost act like a cytokine storm, where your immune system response is so over the top and becomes so aggressive that you actually become your own worst enemy. That becomes the problem. And so I am kind of conscious and self-aware of the fact that, in the Bitcoin social space, as we move to talk to central bankers, we need to make sure that some of our memes and our laser eyes and our have fun staying poor memes don't turn off and don't become our own worst enemy in terms of painting the community in a way. But yet those are great memes, and they're great to inoculate against some of the altcoin and some of the shit coining that goes on. And so it's this difficult balance. And I think that same thing needs to occur in the technology, in the sense that we need to be open to new proposals, and we need to be open to innovation, and we need to not have just a knee-jerk reaction that just because it's new, it's bad. But I have not done the hard work at this point to be able to call out a specific BIP to answer your question, to say I'm excited about this one and I don't think it's getting enough attention.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, guys.
Okay, guys, just submit your request to speak. We can probably get one more question in here. All right. Do you have any requests now on your end? Sometimes my app doesn't give me.
I am not. No, I don't think I see requests that you don't see. But I am going to have to drop in a few, basically at the hour, so in 2 minutes.
Okay.
So maybe before I have to drop and Austin has to drop. Austin, is there anything you'd like to ask me or Sovereign?
I guess the only question I would ask you is, what does the next year look like? And what do you guys need in terms of support from the community or users to kind of see some of the innovation that you're working on come to life?
Well, I think the Sovereign community has built out a huge amount of sort of systems and products over the last year. And there's going to be, I think, a focus on three primary things for the coming year. One is making the systems that currently exist really, really accessible to anyone. Coming back to, you don't have to be technical in order to be free. And so there's going to be a huge amount of work on UI, on accessibility, on first user experiences, on adoption, on marketing, all of that to make it much easier for users to onboard and to take advantage of the system. At the same time, there's a lot of work around infrastructure improvements, utilizing actually zero-knowledge proofs, among other things, and integration with Lightning to achieve scale and instantaneous experience, so that the experience of using decentralized systems is as good or better really, than the experience in using centralized systems. Fewer frictions, more instantaneous, obviously less KYC, no gating. And then there's a lot of ecosystem projects that are launching around FX, around NFTs, around governance, and I expect that we'll see that continue to grow. In terms of what I think could be helpful, I mean, one of the things that I would really like to do, and I've managed to speak to Adam Back about it a couple of times, but haven't it hasn't properly matured yet. I think we should be looking to encourage additional work around sidechains, and I think there's a lot that we could be doing to start the work of improving on this idea of federated pegs. Even now, I think there are additional cryptographic assurances that we could be introducing. I think with Taproot we could make participating in the as a pegnatory more permissionless. And so I think there's work that we can, as the community of those working on sidechain technology, be collaborating around towards that end.
That's great. Well, I certainly look forward to helping you and helping the community in any way I can, and appreciate the invitation to talk about these issues and join the spaces.
It was really great catching up with you. Hopefully we'll do it again sometime. I will, and definitely let's talk about what we can do to accelerate the growth of Bitcoin Layer 2. I'd be happy to have a chat around it.
Well, I'm sure we're going to see
thanks very much, Austin.
In Miami for Bitcoin Miami,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. Well, most likely. I may not be able to travel for health reasons, but if I can, I certainly will.
Well, I wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll see you soon, and look forward to following up offline.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Austin.
Big thanks to Austin Hill, everyone. He's at Austin Hill if you want to follow him. And don't forget at Eden Yago, and also us at Sovryn BTC. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone, and have a great rest of your day wherever you may be. And remember, stay sovereign. Thanks, guys.